truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Wednesday, May 24th, 2023, the 854th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't, or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on a wide variety of podcast platforms and, of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. So let's get started and cover a little social media news, a little tech news, and some political news. Ron DeSantis has decided that today is the day that he is going to announce his candidacy for the Republican nomination for president in 2024, or so we are told. He is expected to do a Twitter Spaces or some sort of Twitter live stream today at 6 p.m. Eastern, hosted by David Sachs, a tech guy who was just a couple of months ago a strong supporter of the Silicon Valley Bank bailout. He wanted everybody to know that it wasn't fair for all of those Silicon Valley companies, the ESG companies, etc., to lose their deposits based on the bad practices of the bank that they were using to move around venture capital and support a whole bunch of technocracy-related tech startups. He is the former COO of PayPal. He's a longtime investor in companies like PayPal, of course, Facebook, Airbnb. He founded a company called Yammer, which was later sold to Microsoft for $1.2 billion. And he has a venture capital firm called Craft Ventures. He has a podcast where he has had all sorts of guests on, and some of that has been good. He has been open to criticism about COVID-related subjects, the vaccines, etc. He was largely opposed to what's happening in Ukraine right now and the U.S.'s involvement. He's a longtime political donor supporting everything from J.D. Vance to Gavin Newsom to the RNC. And now he is a vocal supporter of Ron DeSantis. So he's hosting this little show. Elon Musk is expected to join. And it seems like the aim is to take advantage of the uniparty right safe space that has been carved out on Twitter over the last 7 months. Elon Musk took over the platform. Within a few weeks, the Ron for 2024 movement started. Donald Trump simply said "desanctimonious" one time, and all of the worst people on the internet came out of the woodwork to attack Trump and attack MAGA in defense of Ron DeSantis, thus exposing their entire plan for how they intended to launch his 2024 presidential bid. Now, a lot of people have thought this is kayfabe throughout the entire time. I've mentioned it plenty of times as a possibility. I think it still remains something of a possibility. It's possible, at least. that this whole thing is about getting the rhino establishment, the GOP elite establishment, to announce themselves, to all come out in public, to endorse Ron DeSantis, to support Ron DeSantis, to donate to Ron DeSantis. We've had reports about how much donors on Wall Street are willing to spend to make Ron DeSantis the Republican nominee. And hey, again, if Ron DeSantis is some sort of honeypot for the Republican establishment and the donor class to sink all of their energy into so he can just burn through it before obviously losing, then cool, good on him. Brilliant play by everyone involved. And if his online supporters are aware of that plan and they are running a red team operation against Trump and his supporters, then they're doing a fabulous job of it. And maybe one day I will be giving them credit for it. But assuming that that very low probability scenario is not what's happening, then we need to take this thing seriously and give it the time it deserves, because what we see is the uniparty right and all of the corporate power, the globalist power, the technocratic power behind them rising up to try to destroy Donald Trump and MAGA, as we've seen many times. The Democrats have been attempting this out in the open for many years. Many rhinos have been joining the Democrats in that attempt for many years. And now we are seeing a whole new legion of rhinos on the uniparty right rising up to do the same thing. Now, it's okay if you like Ron DeSantis. And to this point, none of this has really been Ron DeSantis' doing. He's played a very minor role in all of this. But if he's announcing, if he's going forward with this, then he needs to be treated the same as anyone else would be treated when they're getting into this fray. The fact is, they have no rational, honest arguments they can make against Donald Trump and MAGA. They can find things about Donald Trump that they say are bad, and other people will agree that those things are bad. And maybe some of them might even be bad. But what they can't do is find places that Ron DeSantis would have been better at any of those things, realistically, in the circumstances and in relation to the overall project, which is removing this global regime from the United States power structure. That's why we always see them arguing about the minutia of COVID, pretending that because Ron was marginally better about this or that subject, it would have been entirely different with Ron in office, even though there's no proof right now anywhere in the world that Ron DeSantis even has the desire, much less the ability, to stand up to the global regime. They say that Donald Trump surrounded himself with bad people. Most of those people are from the Republican establishment and are back to being part of the Republican establishment. The very same people who are supporting the same people who are supporting Ron DeSantis. That is the Bush family wing of the Republican Party, the Paul Ryan wing, the Karl Rove wing, the Fox News wing. And after undermining Trump while he was in office, they are just back to attacking Trump. Now, we are told that Ron DeSantis surrounds himself with only great people, and that's all he would ever do, except all those great people are part of that same Republican establishment. And so far, the only people we've seen Ron DeSantis surround himself with, except for Joseph Ladapo, are really, really bad people. There are maybe one or two people publicly supporting Ron DeSantis right now that are not ridiculous clowns online. And of course, that's who he's found, because no one who actually cares about the country and the fact that it has been usurped in every way imaginable by both sides of the uniparty would possibly be supporting Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. About the biggest priority in our country right now, the fact that we do not have free and fair and legitimate elections, all of them are silent. And they have to be silent because their argument for why someone other than Trump should be the nominee depends on them saying that Donald Trump can't win. What they're saying is he can't win a rigged election. And they believe Ron DeSantis can win a rigged election. So what does that tell you about their relationship with the regime and, frankly, about Ron's? Now, the place where the uniparty right and the uniparty left agree all the time about everything, the wokest people in the world and the most obsessively anti-woke people in the world all agree that they hate Donald Trump and they hate MAGA and they want to destroy Trump and MAGA. They are absolutely together on that point. The uniparty right, the people supporting Ron DeSantis, are in fact woke as hell compared to MAGA. These are the people who think that they are fighting wokeness by talking about it constantly and attempting to pass little pieces of legislation all around the country that slows down the progress of the uniparty left. It's honestly embarrassing. You fix election fraud, you fix all of it, because nobody is electing the people that are pushing this woke agenda. Those races are stolen, and people who support and protect the uniparty's ability to rig and steal elections are supporting and protecting the uniparty's ability to implement that agenda. What is the point of mostly unsuccessfully fighting wokeness while allowing rigged elections to continue? What does that look like in 10 years? 10 more years of rigged elections. Where are we once we fight wokeness a little bit in 2023 so we can ignore stolen elections? We're entering now like week 6 of talking about Bud Light all the time. It's frankly embarrassing. And honestly, the left loves it. The uniparty left loves talking about this stuff because they can seem like they are actually fighting this big, bad, evil thing on the uniparty right. We're just protecting the trans. Yeah, congratulations, commies. You're protecting them from weak and incompetent people who aren't really threatening your whole thing in the first place. You want to know where real kayfabe is happening? It's happening right there. That whole thing is an act from both sides. Now, I'm not saying that the uniparty right actually loves the trans agenda. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what they are doing will allow all of those agendas to push forward uninhibited because they don't actually have the strength to fight any of it, just like they didn't have the strength to fight against stolen elections. Elections are stolen in broad daylight in this country, and the uniparty right protects the uniparty's ability to steal those elections. But the uniparty right isn't the only group of people who wants Ron DeSantis to be the guy. The uniparty left wants that as well. And we see that in the attacks from people like Gavin Newsom and Hillary Clinton, trying to make Ron DeSantis this larger than life figure, the guy everyone on the left should really be afraid of. All that does is help Ron DeSantis because they are trying to make Ron seem edgy and get a whole lot of people on the right, people who are mainstream normie villagers registered to the Republican Party, rise up and defend Ron DeSantis. This is the headline from Vanity Fair yesterday. Ron DeSantis will formally announce his 2024 bid with Elon Musk because apparently David Duke wasn't available. This is Bess Levin, one of the craziest people online writing for Vanity Fair. She is absolutely nuts. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I just want to make sure that this tactic is clear and obvious. After many months of refusing to confirm what so many people already suspected, Ron DeSantis will reportedly announce on Wednesday that he is running for president. And that's not all. He is said to be planning to formally jump into the 2024 race during a conversation on Twitter with Elon Musk, because apparently other neo-Nazi sympathizers weren't available. Oh, yeah, Elon Musk is a neo-Nazi sympathizer. That's where we are. From people who are right now supporting actual Nazis in Ukraine. Yes, NBC News reports that the Florida governor's formal announcement will occur tomorrow night on Twitter Spaces during a live audio chat that will begin at 6 p.m. Eastern and be moderated by Musk's longtime friend David Sachs. According to the outlet, DeSantis' campaign will release a launch video on Wednesday evening, which the governor will follow up with visits to a number of early states after Memorial Day. As for how all this came together, DeSantis' team has reportedly, quote, been in talks with Musk for at least the last few weeks. According to a person familiar with the matter, and during those discussions, Musk has indicated that he doesn't think Donald Trump will be able to win a second term. While Musk said last year that he would back DeSantis if the governor were to run for president, on Friday, the billionaire praised an ad by Senator Tim Scott, who announced Monday that he is also running for the White House. As NBC notes, aligning with Musk and his 140 million followers could give DeSantis a significant boost. But there's also an obvious downside to teaming up with a guy who has said and done terrible things and who has turned Twitter into a safe haven for hate speech, given a new home to Tucker, great replacement theory Carlson, and made remarks about George Soros that the Anti-Defamation League said would, quote, embolden extremists. On the other hand, it's very possible that that's exactly why DeSantis wants to align himself with Musk. So, of course, white supremacists are on one side and all the good people are on the other side. And now Ron DeSantis is aligning himself with Elon Musk, who is aligned with all the white nationalists and white supremacists and neo-Nazis, even though people like Bess Levin are supporting actual Nazis in Ukraine right now. And maybe at some point, these people would like to explain to the world how any of those movements are on the right, because they are all actually on the left. Fascism and Nazism are both born out of Marxism. The KKK and white nationalists were Democrats. Joe Biden was mentored by a Klansman. It's insane that the old switcheroo they pulled 60 years ago is still working. But don't be confused by the left's media strategy. They are trying to make Ron DeSantis seem strong and edgy and dangerous, which is exactly what you would do with your controlled opposition. That's the point of controlled opposition. It's why they used to be obsessed with how dangerous Ben Shapiro is. Ben Shapiro's not dangerous. Ben Shapiro gets paid $1 million a week to lie to people about the same things the left wants. Go along with all the COVID stuff. Protect stolen elections, promote the vaccine, promote the narrative of the very violent insurrection. You can go on and on and on. This is the game the Uniparty plays. They are trying to elevate Ron DeSantis by calling him dangerous. Now, there may be a downside for DeSantis doing this event on Twitter this evening, but it's not his association with Elon Musk. That is nonsense for child-brained readers of Vanity Fair to believe. Elon Musk is extremely popular in the country overall. So DeSantis is not going to hurt himself that way. He may hurt himself by seeming totally unserious and unprepared. He may hurt himself by being a politician who's not particularly good on his feet and not particularly authentic and not particularly interesting, but he's not going to hurt himself associating with Elon Musk. Now, yesterday, The Verge tweeted out this article, and Elon Musk replied to the tweet simply saying, interesting. The headline, Microsoft's Copilot and Bing AI plugins will be interoperable with ChatGPT. Microsoft is committing to using the same open plugin standard that OpenAI uses for ChatGPT, enabling interoperability between plugins for Bing Chat, Microsoft's Copilot platform, and ChatGPT. It's a welcome step forward for the future of AI chatbots, meaning plugins won't be restricted to one particular platform, and developers and users can build them across both consumer and business-focused experiences. But until Google signs up to the same open plugin standard for Bard, it's limited to 2 companies that have a close partnership. Microsoft extended its OpenAI partnership in a multi-billion-dollar investment earlier this year, just weeks before the company announced its GPT-4-powered Bing Chat. As part of Microsoft's annual Build developer announcements, the software giant is also committing to keep Azure OpenAI's apps interoperable with the same plugin standards that OpenAI uses. That will allow users who create AI apps using Microsoft's service to then bring them to OpenAI's platform or any other that adopts the same open plugin standard. Microsoft is already using plugins in Bing with OpenTable and Wolfram Alpha, and it's now expanding to support plugins from Instacart, Kayak, Klarna, Redfin, and Zillow. So that's shopping, traveling, home buying, and renting. Plugins are essential for AI chatbots like Bing Chat and ChatGPT to expand their abilities and tap into new sources of information from the web and third-party providers. And here's a list of other platforms that will be enabling plugins for Bing Chat soon as well. Bands in Town, Bohita, Cloudflare, Cooper, Fair Portal, Fiscal Note, Golden, Lexi Shopper, Likewise, Notable, One Word Domains, Prompt Perfect, Shopify, Skyscanner, Spotify, Spot Nana, and Trip.com. So a lot of these are pretty popular sites. I haven't seen them all. I haven't gone to all of them. Shopify is a major platform for anyone who sells online. Spotify is obviously one of the biggest music and podcast and content streamers. They're basically adding in platforms from all walks of life so that all that data feeds right back in. We've been talking recently about the idea of this overriding algorithm that all of these sites were connected to in the past, and maybe some of that has been disrupted. One of my theories about Twitter is that it was taken out of that information flow, and we'll see eventually if I'm right or not. But that is a whole lot of customer information flowing in from all these different platforms right back in to Microsoft, OpenAI, and ChatGPT. That is your information flowing in to the big algorithm. And all your family's information and your friends' information and your coworkers' information, pretty much everybody's information. And here's an easy way to think about it. You have had the experience, I'm sure, of going to websites, and those websites offer the opportunity to log in through Google or through Apple or through Facebook or through Twitter. And what happens when you do that? Well, it connects those two things, and then all that data just merges together, feeding in to that great big algorithm in the clouds. And then the richest and most powerful globalists and technocrats in the world get to control you and everyone else by exploiting that data. Doesn't it sound great? The Twitter Daily News account yesterday posted a substantial update to Twitter users. I'll go through it quickly. Elon says Twitter 2.0 has entered its comeback arc in a new interview at the Wall Street Journal CEO Council Summit. He also hints his new AI company, xAI, may have a similar relationship to Tesla and Twitter like OpenAI has to Microsoft. More from the interview with Elon. Twitter may reach cash flow positive next month. Twitter will be hiring, already has started to hire some new staff. Elon was asked if Twitter would be a public company again in 5 years, and Elon replied, "I don't know." It's kind of an interesting question. It's also interesting to consider whether or not there might be more than one definition of public company with the context in which Elon received that question. Elon says he believes artificial general intelligence will happen this decade, in the next 3 to 6 years. He also adds that xAI is intended to be a third major player between OpenAI and DeepMind. More details on this project are coming soon, he says. So your data would flow into that great algorithm rather than the other one. Elon comments on his work schedule. He tends to prefer to spend a whole day working on each of his companies. He reported that Twitter has gotten rid of, quote, well over 90%, end quote, of scams and bots on the platform post-acquisition. It is now harder to operate an effective bot farm on Twitter. The team has also been able to defeat almost all of the troll armies that used to brigade certain topics. Now, I have a real hard time believing that is true. If they've gotten rid of well over 90%, First, you have to wonder why they haven't gotten 100, what that other 10% represents, and whether or not certain bots and scams were allowed to stay on the platform because they're still all over the platform. Elon said he continues to talk with Linda Yaccarino and that he has expressed he will continue to speak his mind on Twitter, and she's happy with that. He also says on their approach to content moderation, she's aligned with him on the goal of sticking close to the law in each country. Now, that is not a standard of free speech absolutism. It's not even close. It's just saying if the politicians tell me that the limits are here, I will comply with those limits. The law in America is, or should be, the Constitution. If you want to play the game about how that only says the government can't limit speech, then we need to do a couple things. First off, Elon Musk and the people who work at Twitter need to admit that they're not committed to a free speech platform, because that is something that they can achieve just based on the ideal of free speech. They wouldn't have to parse the meaning of the First Amendment to allow themselves leeway inside that and say, hey, it's not the government enforcing speech. They would also have to prove that there's no government involvement in the enforcement of speech. And that gets increasingly harder as long as they continue to work with the global regime. If global regime money is tied into Twitter and global regime influence is tied into Twitter through corporations, for instance, aligned with the World Economic Forum, who themselves are aligned with world governments, then you're really just creating a couple levels of plausible deniability. You're putting some space between you and the government so that you can't say the government is controlling the speech, even though a few steps in that process would prove pretty clearly that the control on free speech is coming from the top by government. And not just our government, but global government, which is somehow even worse. Elon explains Twitter 1.0 was focused on a metric called MDAU, monetizable daily average users. But when this was examined more closely, many of these users would never actually visit Twitter. They might see a notification on their phone, but never click into the site. That was being counted as a daily user. Post-acquisition, Twitter 2.0 now instead tracks true user seconds of screen time reported to Twitter by iOS, Android, and the web browser. For mobile, this counts the amount of time the app is in the foreground. Elon says this is the most rigorous way to assess this. So Twitter is receiving information from your phone and from your computer about how many seconds you have Twitter open. Now, I'm not saying that this is strange or weird. I'm not even necessarily saying it's bad. It's kind of just so obvious that this is part of the game. And if you're going to use apps on your phone, this is something that you should understand happens all the time. But it's just another example of how much of your information about your habits and your lifestyle, your thoughts, your behaviors are being fed into the system. He goes on to talk about how advertisers are returning to the platform. And then there is an interesting clip where he discusses what he believes the purpose of their new version of the blue check verification system is.
The first place we have to be careful of AI being used is in social media to manipulate public opinion. So the reason that Twitter is going to a primarily subscriber-based system is because it is dramatically harder to create. It's like, call it 10,000 times harder to create an account that has a verified phone number from a credible carrier, that has a credit card, and that pays a small amount of money per month, and have those credit cards and phone numbers be highly distributed, not clustered, is incredibly difficult. So whereas in the past, someone could create a million fake accounts for a penny apiece, and then manipulate, or have something appear to be very, very much liked by the public when in fact it is not, or promoted and retweeted when in fact it is not, its popularity is not real, and essentially game the system. So the bias towards a subscription-based verification, I think, is very powerful, and that really you won't be able to trust any social media company that does not do this, because it will simply be overrun with bots to such an extreme degree.
Now, you'll know that I've been largely supportive of Elon Musk, and I absolutely can't stand social media bots. So on one hand, all of that sounds pretty good. But if you think about the effect on AI, one of the problems with the AI that we've seen so far, at least theoretically and to some extent in practice with ChatGPT, etc., is that they have a garbage in, garbage out problem. They had a restricted, censored information bubble that was feeding into all of these algorithms, all of these databases, compiling the information that the AIs would then use to formulate their own content, their own responses. But that information flow was distorted by the censorship and also by the bots. So if you want a purer form of information going into the databases and algorithms that run these AIs that ultimately do control a lot of aspects of human existence at this point, what you want is a more uncensored flow with fewer bots so that you know the flow is from real people and that you're getting the range of human views and human experience. The cynical view would be that Elon Musk is actually trying to make the best version of the worst possible thing. Now, there's been a lot of talk about TikTok over the last few years, TikTok's relationship to the Chinese Communist Party, where the data goes from TikTok, and how TikTok uses its platform to manipulate users. Donald Trump was going after TikTok back in 2020 and didn't find much support in American politics, within the political class at least. And then a couple of months ago, out of nowhere, the Uniparty left and Uniparty right combined in saying that maybe we should get rid of TikTok. In Montana, they have put up a bill to ban TikTok in Montana, and everybody's going after TikTok. So there was an interesting article from Monday that flips that on its head a little bit. TikTok will soon grant Oracle full access to code and algorithm. Now, Oracle's Larry Ellison is, or at least was, a Trump backer, and there's been some pretty well researched speculation by Richard the Saint and others that Oracle may be supplying a lot of the technological and database background and infrastructure for this counter movement against the global regime. So a TikTok Oracle crossover is the sort of thing that should grab your attention. TikTok will soon grant Oracle Corporation full access to its source code, algorithm, and content moderation material as part of efforts to alleviate national security concerns about the app. Oracle will also begin monitoring the controlled gateways where data comes in and out of the secure environment it set up on servers to host data from TikTok's U.S. users, according to a statement from the social media company Monday. The work is part of TikTok's Project Texas, a plan to cordon off U.S. users' data and allow its technology to be reviewed by partners like Oracle to assess security risks. The social media company introduced the plan to alleviate criticism from policymakers who worry that its ownership by a Chinese tech company, ByteDance Limited, opens the door to influence or data collection by the Chinese government. TikTok is currently facing federal and state level legislation that aims to ban or limit the app's use in America on national security grounds. And consider what we're talking about here, big picture, right? It's easy to say TikTok is bad. TikTok is bad. Trump has said TikTok is bad. We know that TikTok has some relationship with the Chinese government. Maybe we don't know exactly what that is. We know that no one paid attention to it, that Democrats and members of the Uniparty have made a lot of money on TikTok, influenced a lot of people on TikTok. And then out of nowhere, a couple of months ago, we know that the government begins a formal effort of going after TikTok in an attempt to shut it down. Now, we're getting the news on Monday that TikTok and Oracle are going to be working together, supposedly to protect U.S. users' data. They're going to put a U.S. tech company as a middleman here, and that is supposed to secure the situation, and potentially it will. So we got the news Monday, but there's no way in the world those talks started on Monday. It's possible that those talks may have started a couple of months ago, and that may be what sparked all of that new action that we were seeing from Congress. Now, Montana, we are told, is a red state, and therefore, whatever Montana is doing must be good for Republicans and America First. But of course, that's not true. That's not how things work. Nothing about Montana being a red state says that they are actually prioritizing America First values and positions. There are plenty of regime politicians in Montana, just like everywhere else. And if the regime wants something like this done, then a state like Montana steps up and does it. And we are supposed to think, oh, good. Many of the major components of Project Texas are already operational, and we will continue bringing more parts of the initiative online in the coming weeks and months, the company said. Oracle started inspecting portions of TikTok source code in the so-called Dedicated Transparency Center, which went live in January. Both TikTok and Oracle are continuing to work toward a solution with the U.S. government, TikTok said. Our teams have been working together on all TikTok software that Oracle will ultimately inspect and continually monitor while ensuring U.S. users have an uninterrupted experience. Oracle didn't immediately respond to a request for comment. Now, people might wonder why people like me focus so much on the social media thing. Well, this is the back end of the information war. This is the layout of the battlefield in the information war. These massive corporations are working with governments to figure out how to control the flow of information for people all across the world. We have seen the effect of social media and the effect of censorship, the effect of social media manipulation, and how that can change societies, how it can change the beliefs of people. You look at all these trends that we've seen over the years, the race wars that they have tried to start, all of the gender nonsense. That stuff exists and is pressed forward primarily on social media. We see the political stuff. We see the stuff from the finance world. The amount of information they have and their ability to control the information that goes out, the information that people see, their ability to target individual people with certain forms of information to change their beliefs and attitudes. That's a big part of the information war. We can talk about people's own personal responsibility with information. We can talk about individual beliefs. We can talk about individual awakenings. All of that is important, but this is the technical side. This is the background. This is the layout. This is the landscape we are dealing with. And so we have to understand what that looks like and what the moves are being made on that landscape. This is how we get censored. This is how we see so much propaganda all the time. And speaking of propaganda, America First Legal posted this thread on Twitter today. America First Legal released documents obtained from a FOIA lawsuit, that's Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, against the Department of State, exposing how the Global Engagement Center carries out state propaganda through private media organizations. The GEC routinely coordinates with a global cartel of quote-unquote independent fact-checkers led by the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, which operates PolitiFact, and members of its international fact-checking network, the IFCN, International Fact-Checking Network. IFCN received its initial funding from the Department of State-funded National Endowment for Democracy, the Omidyar Network, that's eBay's Pierre Omidyar, Google, Facebook, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and George Soros's Open Society Foundations. So they are funding the Department of State project for the International Fact-Checking Network. Members of this vast cartel range from independent foreign journalists to professional fact checkers to American mainstream media organizations like the Associated Press and USA Today. Notably, Poynter's IFCN received a 2021 Nobel Peace Prize nomination for censorship and propaganda. There's your Nobel Prize, everybody. The GEC regularly works with IFCN on targeted campaigns. For example, the GEC worked closely with Baybars Orsic, Poynter's Director of International Programming, to set up an IFCN partner in Tunisia. The GEC-funded project would work on, quote, achieving two main objectives. 1. Launch a fact-check platform to provide accurate information to media outlets, government officials, and social influencers to counter the disinformation on COVID-19. And 2, 240 youth are trained to be social influencers or de-scramblers, promoting accurate information in their local communities to help the Ministry of Health disseminate the Crisis and Risks Communication Plan related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the Global Engagement Center is propping up this social media influence campaign in Tunisia to inform their government, media, and social influencers, and they're propping up 240 young social media influencers so that they can relay the information to the public. And let's get the full picture here. So the globalists, the philanthropists, the very best people in the whole world, the people who go to all of the big conferences, the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group, those people are funding U.S. State Department programs, the Global Engagement Center, the International Fact-Checking Network. They're taking money over to Tunisia to set up young social media influencers who will communicate the proper information, not the disinformation, on COVID-19. And let's refine that down just one more time. The globalists are paying U.S. government agencies to create info ops in Tunisia. I think that's about as simple as we can make it. Does that sound like something that the government should be doing in your name? The GEC also funded a grant through the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, the IWPR, on, quote, empowering fact-checking in the global south, end quote. And it enlisted Baybars Orsic and Alana Dvorak, Poynter's international training manager, for a potential mentorship through Poynter/IFCN in Tunisia. In particular, the Global Engagement Center aimed to ensure that two specific media organizations in Tunisia would, quote, absorb the fact-checking skills, end quote, to censor disfavored narratives from the news. Another email conversation later shows a GEC official thanking the IFCN international training manager for, quote, speaking with Africa Check about her work in Tunisia. Africa Check is a fact-checking organization substantially funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Google News Initiative, the Open Society Foundation for South Africa, the IFCN, the Omidyar Network, the Department of State, and earned income through Facebook. Another email shows the IFCN soliciting the GEC to do additional programming in Egypt, and presumably with additional American taxpayer funding. When threatened, they join together to protect their mutual interests. On the other hand, they exclude other media organizations with whom they disagree. For example, David Mickelson of Snopes attempted to discredit the Daily Caller to kick them out of their Google groups on combating fake news, the science of misinformation, even though another member raised the point that Daily Caller had the same source credibility score as CNN and MSNBC. The work of the international fact-checking cartel might be admirable if it actually lived up to its, quote, commitment to nonpartisanship and fairness, end quote, but their methods appear strongly biased toward the promotion of state-approved talking points. For example, a professional fact-checker at PolitiFact, which is operated by the Poynter Institute, appeared to rely on the Global Engagement Center to debunk, quote, a claim that stems from the letter that GOP senators wrote to the Biden administration, end quote, even though the GEC was under the Biden administration. Next, we further uncovered that news outlets that have been formerly respected for critical investigative journalism are now mere mouthpieces for state media, and their journalists are eagerly willing to spread propaganda on behalf of the GEC. The Washington Post readily jumped into the conversation to discredit the New York Post reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop. On October 14th, 2020, the New York Post published the now infamous story based on a laptop detailing how Hunter Biden used the position and influence of his father for personal gain and with the apparent awareness of now President Biden. On the same day, Ellen Nakashima, a national security reporter with the Washington Post covering election security, reached out to the GEC requesting a call on, quote, more declassified Russian disinformation. On October 15th, 2020, Ellen Nakashima published an article stating the Washington Post was unable to verify the authenticity of the alleged communications, while alluding to the likelihood that the Hunter Biden story was the product of a Russian intelligence operation. On October 16th, Ellen Nakashima sent another email to the GEC to inquire about upcoming releases by the GEC. On October 21st, less than 2 weeks before Election Day, Ellen Nakashima published an article in the Washington Post sounding the alarm on Russian interference in the 2020 election cycle. Nakashima also highlighted numerous federal agency lines of effort to combat Russian interference, including the GEC's August 2020 report exposing websites and organizations as Russian spies spreading disinformation. The GEC report referenced in Ellen Nakashima's article, however, turned out to be contradictory, according to Matt Taibbi in the Twitter files, number 17, which detailed how the GEC would send Twitter lists of hundreds of accounts it suspected to be foreign disinformation, even though the lists, quote, included multiple Western government accounts and at least 3 CNN employees based abroad. Mainstream media outlets eagerly rely on the GEC as an authoritative source based on its credibility and presumed access to accurate intelligence. As the fact check by PolitiFact above demonstrates, however, this presents the risk that critical investigative journalists become nothing more than state media mouthpieces. On January 19th, 2021, one day before the Biden administration officially began, a Global Engagement Center public affairs officer attempted to enlist Michael Gordon of the Wall Street Journal to publish a story promoting the GEC's talking points on Russian disinformation and COVID-19 vaccines. Meanwhile, on February 2nd, 2021, New York Times reporter Julian Barnes obtains an introduction to the GEC through his National Security Agency contact for his story on Russian anti-vax disinformation. On February 4th, 2021, with another potential outlet seemingly interested in writing a story on the topic of interest, the GEC shared its talking points with the New York Times. By February 12, 2021, the GEC deputy spokesperson, J.T. Ice, warned Michael Gordon that it will pitch the story to another outlet if the Wall Street Journal didn't publish the story imminently. Finally, on March 7, 2021, the Wall Street Journal published the story the GEC wanted. Disappointingly for the New York Times reporter, the Wall Street Journal was finally able to run with the story. One day later, Deirdre Chesgreen with the USA Today eagerly reached out to GEC to learn more about the Wall Street Journal's story. The GEC's financial support of these media organizations also implicates the supposed independence of their reporting. The GEC Information Access Fund appears to pay for the licensing of free New York Times content in English and Mandarin in newsrooms across the Pacific Islands. The Associated Press also appears to rely on funding from the Department of State in the Pacific Islands. So essentially, the globalists, the philanthropists, the best people in the world who control everything, who plan our future from these various conferences around the world, and then give big speeches and write best-selling books about how the future is going to be for us, while they also change the stories of our past. They write best-selling books about how our history was something entirely different than what we knew. In fact, the parties were all reversed, and the good people were the bad people are the good people, and it's all very confusing. So just trust us. We're telling you the truth all the time. Those globalists are funding State Department linked organizations like the Global Engagement Center and the International Fact-Checking Network that run propaganda campaigns and do censorship in countries all around the world. And they link in directly with our mainstream media. There is a financial relationship there. There is an information sharing relationship there. And the GEC and these fact-checking organizations are considered authoritative sources for the media, to the point where the media will go to them to find out what the story is. It's essentially like they've gotten rid of all of the interference between global intelligence organizations like the CIA, MI6, Five Eyes, etc., and the news as it's printed. It is just the same thing. Hey guys, can you tell us what the story is? Say all of these journalists at major media outlets. And they're like, hey guys, here's the story. This is the exact story with all the details you need. And this story should not be questioned at all. In fact, if anyone questions it, you just come to us. We'll let you know how those people are wrong. We'll fact check the hell out of it. That'll go away. This is the story. This is the official story. You are hearing exactly how the official story is being delivered from the top down. The things that most people believe to be true in this country and around the world are all things they were told to believe, and that they must believe because the information comes from authoritative sources. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a system. Here's the system laid out right before you. Now, you might be aware that the globalist organization, the World Health Organization, is holding their World Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland right now. Nur bin Laden was on War Room this morning talking about a highlight of that meeting.
In the early 1920s, the League of Nations, which we've discussed many times before. And what's interesting is that yesterday here, at the World Health Assembly, a new partnership was announced between the WHO and the Rockefeller Foundation. Now, this is very important because it touches on exactly what Congressman Bachmann said. The name of this partnership, I have it right here. What they're calling it is the Rockefeller Foundation and World Health Organization partnership to expand global pandemic preparedness in an era of climate change. And they will be focused on collaborating on genomic surveillance, pathogen detection tools, and climate-related threats. Now, what I'd like to say is, coming back to the history of all of this, in the 1920s, the Rockefeller Foundation was the very motor of the League of Nations international health body, the predecessor to the World Health Organization. And so they've been working on this infrastructure, but also on this narrative that nation states are not equipped to be able to handle and respond to international health threats. And this is the justification that they are using since 100+ years to further their goal and step by step implement this new world order. It all ties together, and Geneva is at the epicenter of this.
So the World Health Assembly is going on in Geneva. They are working toward the Global Pandemic Treaty, which will hand all control over to the WHO whenever they have announced a pandemic of international concern. It's basically the agreement to go along with and obey whatever the global community says the next time we have a very deadly pandemic. And the Rockefellers, who have been working to create that sort of international body for over 100 years now, have made a new partnership, a new agreement. It was covered in Yahoo Finance from PR Newswire. The Rockefeller Foundation and World Health Organization announced partnership to expand global pandemic preparedness in the era of climate change. And you might ask yourself, what the hell does climate change have to do with global pandemics? Aren't these both things that have been completely made up by the global communist regime? And the answer is yes. They both have been made up. Do people get diseases and spread diseases? Do those diseases spread widely sometimes? Yes. Does the weather change sometimes? Yes. Are either of those the sorts of things that we should destroy society for, change the world for, in order to combat them, even though destroying society and changing the world won't actually combat them? Well, the answer is obviously no, but that doesn't make them stop wanting control. So the answer has to be yes. How are we going to get the answer to be yes for all of these people out in the world? Well, let's try an information campaign where we censor any dissent, we propagandize them all the time, we infiltrate every organization that they ever have anything to do with, and don't worry, all those organizations have all their data, so it's going to be extra easy to manipulate them, and then we'll get a yes. And these people will beg us to take all of their control, all of their money, all of their power. And when they give us all of that, we're going to pat them nicely on the head and tell them they've been a good boy. And because they've been so well behaved, we're going to allow them to spend some of their digital fiat dollars on something they might really enjoy, like one of Klaus's juicy cricket burgers. To the article. The Rockefeller Foundation and the World Health Organization have announced a new partnership to strengthen the WHO hub for pandemic and epidemic intelligence. As part of the collaboration, the foundation is investing $5 million in partners working with the WHO to cultivate global networks for pathogen detection and strengthen pandemic preparedness capabilities, including broadening surveillance for diseases worsened by rising temperatures and extreme weather. Established in 2021, the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence facilitates a global collaboration of partners from multiple sectors to address future pandemic and epidemic risks with better access to data, better analytical capacities, and better tools and insights for decision-making. The partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation will accelerate these efforts with catalytic funding and technical assistance. The Rockefeller Foundation will support projects under the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence's stewardship, including scaling global capacity for genomic surveillance through the newly launched International Pathogen Surveillance Network. And that doesn't sound like any sort of problem. Developing a digital platform in partnership with data.org to enable real-time communication and collaboration between public health analysts and researchers across the globe to scale evidence-based, field-tested epidemic tools. Developing user-centered product strategies for existing WHO intelligence solutions to better support global public health agencies. Improving outbreak detection through the Global Health Data Science Initiative in partnership with the University of Oxford and Boston Children's Hospital, among others. And those are supposed to be great institutions. Doesn't Boston Children's Hospital do all those trans surgeries on minors? Yep, that's them. Climate change is increasing both the risk of another global pandemic and the need to collaborate and share data, said Dr. Rajiv Shah, president of the Rockefeller Foundation. Fortunately, the WHO Pandemic Hub is already making us smarter and safer by helping track threats, find solutions, and connect countries and continents. We are proud to partner with the Hub to expand its focus on preventing pandemics fueled by climate change. So this is legitimately a PR release from the Rockefeller Foundation, reprinted in Yahoo Finance. And we are expected to believe that pandemics will continue to get much, much worse due to climate change. So what we have to do is recognize that one problem can't be solved without the other problem being solved. And so what we got to do is gather all the power and the status and the wealth from everyone we can, get all of the globalists, all of the philanthropists together on how to fix this polycrisis. Do you remember a couple of months ago learning about the polycrisis? That was the World Economic Forum's new approach, Klaus's new approach, the polycrisis. All of the problems in the world have some sort of interplay, therefore they are all connected, therefore you can't solve any of them without solving all of them, and therefore we're going to need all the power and the status and the wealth and all the control so that we can implement the system that is going to fix them all at the same time. Normal people just want to go on living their lives? Well, that's not going to work. The only way that normal people will ever be able to live their lives again is if everyone gives us all the power so that we can fix these problems. Unfortunately, the problems are never going to be fixed because no one is ever going to give us all the power we need. So we're going to keep having these problems and we're going to keep demanding more power. And in the meantime, your life, you're just not going to be able to live it as normal. But these lunatics are worried about the next pandemic. And this fall, they're planning on doing a new pandemic simulation to make sure that everything works just as intended. You got to get those plans out there. You got to publish them. You got to send them around to everybody so that everybody can get on the same page with the messaging and the rollout and the whole thing. We wouldn't want to just be casual about a pandemic, like it just came up naturally by surprise, like a bat in some wet market just gets someone sick and the whole world's like, oh no, what do we do? How do we react? No, you can't have a pandemic that way. You got to plan a pandemic if you want a good pandemic. The approach you need to take to a pandemic is like the approach that a 34-year-old semi-successful fashion blogger on Instagram would take to planning her own wedding and making sure that her 2 or 3 slightly more famous fashion blogger friends are going to arrive and that they have all sorts of perfect picture locations. They have activities planned for the whole weekend, mostly for the wedding party, but every now and then the normal people can come too. They need to have the lighting perfect, the food perfect, the plates perfect, the tables perfect, the attendance perfect, and where everyone is sitting must be perfect. The entertainment must be perfect. The guy doing the marriage must be perfect. Absolutely everything on that day must be perfect. Therefore, we have to plan out every single minor detail and make sure everybody involved with the wedding understands the plan, is totally on board, and executes their part with precision. That is the only way we can have a successful wedding. I mean, pandemic. Otherwise, those suckers and losers and rubes might start thinking for themselves and doing their own research and not following the plan. And then we're not going to have a pandemic at all because no one's going to go along with it. So you gotta do what I say, Annabelle, or you're not going to be my maid of honor. And so, if you are going to plan out a successful pandemic, just like when you're going to plan out a successful wedding, you got to send out the save the date notices. And that's what they're doing right now. This is from the New York Post today. The next pandemic, even deadlier than COVID, is coming, warns WHO. The head of the World Health Organization warned that the world must prepare for the next pandemic, which could be, quote unquote, even deadlier than the COVID-19 pandemic, which it turns out was actually just as deadly as an average flu. And if we hadn't paid attention to it, no one would have known about it at all. But instead, we pretend that it is the deadliest thing that ever happened. In a meeting of the World Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland on Monday, Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus sounded an alarm that the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over, even though everybody around the world has said that the pandemic is over. The threat of another variant emerging that causes new surges of disease and death remains, Tedros said. and the threat of another pathogen emerging with even deadlier potential remains. However, the WHO recently declared that the COVID-19 pandemic is no longer a health emergency. When the next pandemic comes knocking, and it will, we must be ready to answer decisively, collectively, and equitably, he said. We cannot kick this can down the road, Tedros said in an address to the WHO member states. If we do not make the changes that must be made, then who will? And if we do not make them now, then when? Despite issuing these dire warnings, Tedros applauded the recent decision by WHO member states to draft a pandemic treaty while also approving a budget increase, which was approved after the organization made a commitment to budget and finance reforms, according to Reuters. Tedros also called for updated negotiations on the international health regulations, the treaty outlining preparedness and responses to health crises, so the world will never again have to face the devastation of a pandemic like COVID-19. Except, that next one that's going to be even deadlier. But we're going to tell you that there won't be a pandemic if you give us all the power. Otherwise, if you don't, then another pandemic, even deadlier than the first. The WHO has identified priority contagious diseases. These are likely to cause the next pandemic because of their potential to spread across a region and because there are few, if any, measures in place to counter their spread. These diseases include Ebola, Marburg, Middle East respiratory syndrome, severe acute respiratory syndrome, that's just SARS, COVID-19, Zika, and perhaps the most terrifying, something called Disease X. Disease X is the WHO code for a disease caused by a germ that hasn't even been discovered yet. It's not an exaggeration to say that there is potential of a Disease X event just around the corner. Pranab Chatterjee, a researcher at the Department of International Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore, told the National Post. So the next pandemic that might happen, that might be even deadlier than the last pandemic, unless you give us more power and, you're not going to be able to give us enough. So it's going to be deadlier. There's going to be another pandemic. It could be any of these diseases that we already have scared you about, or it could be a disease so scary that we don't even know about it. And that's coming straight from Johns Hopkins University, which is essentially the home of the Prussian medical infrastructure community in the United States. And apparently now they've joined with Bloomberg. So thrilling. Aren't you comforted to know that our next disease, our next very deadly pandemic might have the same name as Elon Musk's new company and AI project? They're just going to be called X. That's it. The whole world is going to be destroyed by X next year, according to the best people on the planet. And everyone's going to believe it because they have all the control over the information. But don't worry, Ron is here to save us. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under a quarter per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's hell!